Welcome to Health Implications of Climate Change. We hope that by participating in this activity, you will increase your knowledge of climate change and how it relates to your health, your patient's health, and the health of the people you love. We hope that you become better able to explain to patients how climate change is affecting their health. Kelly? One problem, I forgot to turn off notifications, and of course something flashed right
Oh, okay.
when it started.
Okay.
So now I am going to go do that.
Oh, okay. So did you just pause it?
Well, I kept hitting it, kept going boom, boom, boom. So I'm
Ah.
not sure that it has paused or not.
Oh, okay.
Do not disturb.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, it's just change your time, yeah.
Okay. It's okay. All right.
Okay. There you go.
And now I need to start again though, because that,
Yeah, so right here.
okay.
I was just thinking like we could just pause for a second here. It's not letting us pause here.
And that one didn't work either.
Okay. We'll just start again and then we'll just edit out that
Okay.
part. Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to Health Implications of Climate Change. We hope that by participating in this activity, you increase your knowledge of climate change and how it relates to your health, your patient's health, and the health of the people you love. We hope you become better able to explain to patients how climate change is affecting their health and that you might be encouraged to take steps to help reduce the progression of climate change caused by human activity in a way that is effective for you. But first, please read the disclosures. Okay, take a few moments. Please jot down or state something aloud you know to be true about climate change that you would perhaps share with another person in conversation, health-related or not. In fact, if you are taking this study with others, pause and share a brief conversation about climate change. You have just done something EcoAmerica, an organization which builds public support for climate change solutions, has found to be key in creating awareness and having productive conversations about climate change. Speaking with nurses. Early climate change news focused on drowning polar bears and detailed scientific reports, which did get the conversation started, but didn't exactly move the general public to pay attention to climate change for long or to act immediately. Too far away, too complicated, or others can solve the problem. The next phase of climate change talk was on technology and good new jobs. That sparked a flurry of renewable energy generation here and there, but still didn't create overwhelming desire for overall change. We must have liked our old jobs too much. So what does resonate? Health, The general public cares for health for themselves and their loved ones, and the time has come to consider some changes. The Nurses Climate Challenge is the first attempt at launching a national movement that revolves around nurses educating their healthcare colleagues on the health impacts of climate change. This challenge involves recruiting nurse climate champions who have access to a set of online resources created by Healthcare Without Harm and Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, or ANHE, A-N-H-E. If I refer to ANHE, I'm not talking about a person, but to this organization. This PowerPoint includes some of those resources, and I've also modified it to address climate change concerns that are more specific to Ohio, something that ANHE has encouraged nurse climate champions to do. Healthcare Without Harm is an international nonprofit with the mission of transforming healthcare worldwide so that it reduces its environmental footprint and becomes a community anchor for sustainability and a leader in the global movement for environmental health. Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, or ANHE, is a national nonprofit nursing organization with the mission of promoting healthy people and healthy environments by educating and leading the nursing profession, advancing research, incorporating evidence-based practice, and influencing policy. The initial Nurses Climate Challenge goal was to educate 5,000 professionals on climate change and health, so that those who are educated will be committed to advocating for a healthier planet and healthier patients, communities, friends, and families. That goal was reached on February 20th, 2019, when 5,007 had been educated. As of September 9th, 2019, the figure stood at 10,511. So the goal is now 50,000. Following completion of this activity, your numbers will be reported, but not your names, to be counted towards this goal. And why nurses? Well, we all know about the consistent professional trust rankings that nurses enjoy in the annual Gallup polls. The public would trust our message. And in a recent EcoAmerica survey from winter 2019, using a large representative sample, majority of respondents reported that they would trust health professionals for information and guidance about climate change. This resonated more strongly with some demographic groups: African Americans, Latinos, women over 50, and millennials. Some of the groups in America projected to be the most affected by climate change. Nurses have an opportunity. We are able to speak to people about health effects and to gain support for reversing climate change. The medical journal, The Lancet, is the oldest English medical journal and is still one of the most influential in the world. It has led efforts to better understand the links between health and climate change for 3 decades, with its work recently punctuated by several key publications. The 2009 Lancet Commission first mapped out the impacts of climate change on health and concluded that it is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. And then in 2015, the Commission felt that tackling climate change could become the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. Going forward, The Lancet releases an annual publication tracking the world as it moves from climate change as a threat to human health to the response as an opportunity. A recent online course produced by Harvard University estimated that there are about 100 diseases which are climate sensitive, likely to increase in frequency and severity with climate change. There is support for nurses taking on this work in our Code of Ethics, Provision 8, and in our Scope and Standards of Practice, number 17. The environmental health competencies include assessing for, communicating about, and reducing environmental health risks to self, colleagues, and consumers. Advanced environmental health competencies encourage even further involvement and partnerships. And we all know how Florence positively impacted the health of her world by addressing the environmental concerns of her day. Fresh air, clean water, healthy food. Most people understand the basics of climate change accelerated by human activities, but here is a quick review. The sun heats the earth by sending UV rays, and the earth reflects heat back out into space, many through infrared rays. Burning fossil fuels, human activity, and other human activities release gases into the Earth's atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, fluorocarbons, for example. These gases allow the sun's UV rays in, but not the infrared rays back out. When these greenhouse gases build up in the Earth's atmosphere, they trap in the sun's heat. Over time, this trapped heat has led to an increase in the average global temperature, about 0.15 degrees Fahrenheit each decade since 1895, or about 0.8 degrees centigrade total. The warming effect is greater at the poles. As the poles heat up, ice melts and more water becomes available, which results in worse storms. Warmer air holds more water and flooding. Other parts of the world are more affected by heat, drought, and wildfires. CO2 makes up most of the greenhouse gases. However, due to chemical structure, methane, CH4, has a global warming potential 21 times that of CO2. CO2 is the base gas that is addressed, though, in many ways to reduce climate change. The greenhouse gases that create climate change are also the same ones that create ambient pollution. We improve ambient pollution when we reduce greenhouse gas emissions to reduce climate change. So, just how much carbon dioxide is in our air anyway? These slides are from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's, or NOAA, observatory at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. What a great place to measure atmospheric carbon dioxide, right? It's measured there because the offshore winds draw in well-mixed air from all over, and there are relatively few additional emissions nearby. Last May, NOAA measured the highest carbon dioxide levels ever recorded, 414.7 parts per million. We were under 300 at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, around 280. And who would be the leading contributor to these high levels? China, the US, and Europe. And where in the world are the people most likely to be affected by climate change? Not in the high-emitting countries. People living closer to the equator instead. Data is reported in billions of metric tons of carbon emitted per year. It was collected in 2018 by World Factbook, but the data from the various countries is from multiple years because the different countries collect and report this data at different times. According to the US Energy Information Administration, Ohio is 6th in the nation for CO2 emissions. 207.4 metric tons in 2016, the most recent year of data. Most of Ohio's emissions come from transportation and electric power generation. The New York Times recently published heat maps using data from the United States Energy Information Administration to show how the United States generated electricity from 2001, that's the far left data point, to 2017. The far right data point. Coal is brown, natural gas is orange, and nuclear is purple. This is the US picture as of 2017. Note that natural gas has overtaken coal around 2016, 32% versus 30%. This is a good thing because natural gas burns cleaner than coal, sending less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but it is non-renewable. The tiny blue and yellow strips at the bottom represent renewable sources of energy, like wind, 6%, and solar, between 1 and 2%. Now let's see how Ohio gets its power. Yes, mostly brown, carbon-emitting coal. But the percentage of cleaner, not yet non-renewable, natural gas is rising. However, you can barely see the 1% ribbon of blue for wind at the bottom, and the yellow solar doesn't even show up. The pink that you can see represents oil. Ohio generates about 57% of its electricity from coal, which is a reduction from 87% in 2001. 24% from natural gas, 15% nuclear, which is clean, but has other environmental hazards like radioactive waste. 2% renewable, that's wind, solar, and hydro combined, and 1% from oil. Of all the states, we're ranked 48th in renewables. So how does all of this impact Ohio's health? Well, this excellent image is from the Center for Disease Control. You may have seen it in other places. It's a very good picture of how climate change affects health. It's great for showing how the effects of climate change impact human health. The center ring shows the cycle of increasing carbon dioxide, which leads to rising temperatures, and more extreme weather, and rising sea levels. The next ring highlights the 8 primary global effects that occur due to warmer temperatures: extreme heat, severe weather, air pollution, changes in vector ecology, increasing allergens, water quality impacts, water and food supply impacts, and environmental degradation. Take a moment to read some of the specific health threats humans are now faced with due to climate change around the outer edge of the diagram. We care for people who are already experiencing these health impacts. As you can imagine, some people are more at risk than others. Who in particular do you think they would be? Any of the patients that you currently care for? Health impacts of climate change do vary by region, as shown on this map prepared by the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. We'll focus mostly on those aspects projected to occur in our area: extreme temperatures, mosquito and tick-borne infections, water-related infection, food-related infection in agriculture, and mental health. Please note that under agriculture, Ohio is not projected to experience crop failure and food shortages like in some areas of the world, but our crops, agricultural practices, and yields may be expected to change. Yes, we've definitely experienced more heat waves recently, which is defined as 3 or more days in a row at 90 degrees Fahrenheit or more. For the United States, mortality increases 4% during heat waves. Although the heat alone is responsible for some deaths, i.e. from heat stroke, most heat-related illness and death is due to exacerbation of chronic conditions, particularly cardiovascular illness, stroke, and respiratory illness. Additional heat poses additional stress. This chart is from the National Climate Assessment. Simply note the trend. Since this is an online activity, I cannot do what Al Gore did in his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, That is, climb a huge ladder to place the most recent temperature data points higher and higher. Still, it's an effective image for anyone who has seen that documentary. Just keep in mind we've gone up about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.8 degrees centigrade since pre-industrialization era. The Paris Climate Accord, for which the United States is not officially out until the day after the November 2020 elections, and who knows, maybe we can still stay in it, but the accord attempts to hold the world to no more than a 2-degree centigrade increase, or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, from pre-industrial levels by 2050. Many experts, however, add that only a 1.5 degree centigrade would be better. This chart is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, data, which with projected average temperature changes for Ohio up to the year 2100. Both if we had lower emissions, where it only goes up about 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and higher emissions where it can go up maybe up to 15 degrees higher. A few places in Ohio have to consider the urban heat island effect. Cities having more pavement and rooftops and cement buildings causes more heat to be absorbed and less heat reflected, making cities hotter during the day and remain hotter at night. The graph in the lower right corner roughly shows how the temperatures vary across locations. It can be 85 degrees Fahrenheit in a suburban residential area and 92 in urban downtown. I noticed the difference by looking at my car thermometer as I drive from urban Cleveland to the suburbs on a hot day. Try it if you're in a place where you can. Urban heat island effect has warmed cities even more than the effects of climate change and has increased ground level ozone and air pollution. Think, where do you suppose many people who can be considered urban poor are living? Which areas experience the highest rates of asthma? Any relationship? An organization of climate scientists and journalists, Climate Central, recently determined the US cities with the fastest growing heat island effects. Any guesses as to where Ohio cities might fit in? That's right, Columbus has increased the most. It's not to say that they have the most heat island effect, but they are increasing the fastest. Cleveland is not far behind. Cincinnati actually has been decreasing their heat island effect by planting more green space. Cities the world over have built green spaces to decrease heat retention and improve overall health. A vacant to vibrant program in Cleveland takes land where foreclosed and demolished properties once stood, works together with the neighbors, and has been creating small green spaces in ways that the residents have desired. A nurse who was part of a hospital green health program in Maryland spoke at the recent Annie Summit and is doing the same thing in her urban hospital neighborhood. This slide is from the Lancet Countdown, and it shows how heat waves affect health. Exposure to extreme heat is the leading cause of weather-related deaths in the United States. One estimate predicts that by 2050, approximately 3,400 more Americans will die prematurely each year as a result. Heat waves are also associated with increase of heat stress and heat stroke, increased aggression and violence, increased worsening of mental health conditions, increased suicide rate, and decreased cognitive function. For the heart and lungs, increased heat is associated with increased rate of cardiovascular disease and stroke. Definitely increased rate of asthma and COPD. Increased risk for dehydration and exacerbation of kidney disease. Increased rate of premature birth and low birth weight, and then subsequent problems. It also increases bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Nurses could consider climate change as a factor for patients with the potential for any of these conditions. Which people would be at greatest risk? Like most nurses, you've probably answered the elderly, urban poor, people without access to fans or air conditioning, pregnant women, and newborns. And you'd be right. It's also important to remember that young, healthy outdoor workers and athletes are at risk too. In fact, 1/3 of all heat-related emergency room visits to the United States are young men. Heat stroke is the leading cause of illness and death in young athletes. Each year, 9,000 high school-aged athletes are treated for heat-related illness. Football players are 11 times more likely to experience illness from the heat than all other high school athletes combined. And that's from the Medical Society Consortium. Air pollution. Outdoor air pollution from the burning of fossil fuel is estimated to cause 7 million deaths annually, more than all of the deaths of TB, malaria, and AIDS combined. Most vulnerable are people with pre-existing respiratory conditions and cardiovascular disease. In addition to carbon emissions and ground-level ozone, climate-related air pollution can come from indoor mold following floods and allergenic plant pollen. This can also cause exacerbations in asthma and allergies. Speaking of asthma, in 2018, the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America looked at overall prevalence, number of emergency room visits, and mortality due to asthma to determine the most challenging places to live for people with asthma. What do you notice about Ohio? That's right, we rank right up there. Number 3, Dayton. Number 6, Cincinnati. Number 7, Youngstown. Number 10, Toledo. Number 15, Cleveland. Number 18, Akron. How could this relate to Ohio's energy policies and level of carbon emissions? This is a map from the EPA, which shows number of days various cities registered unhealthy air quality in 2016, 2017, and a 10-year average. At least we and our patients in Ohio don't have to suffer low air quality due to wildfires like out west, or do we? How would you describe the weather in this slide? This was not a cloudy day. There should have been blue sky. This is from northern Minnesota, which was getting smoke from Canadian wildfires that were raging over 300 miles away. I was the photographer taking a picture of my daughter's quartet, and we could smell smoke. Our air passages were definitely burning, and particulate matter from wildfires does travel. Matter from that horrendous campfire in northern Paradise Campfire in Northern California last summer was detected as far away as New England. And what was in that particulate matter? Less than 2.5 microns in size. Acrolein, which is a lung irritant. Carbon monoxide, fatal at high concentrations. Formaldehyde, benzenes, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons. They all cause cancer. In addition, particulate matter 2.5 microns or smaller is associated with heart attacks, stroke, preterm birth, and lung cancer. Ragweed seasons have increased by 11 to 27 days a year throughout the United States. And this was a national climate assessment. data. One study tested ragweed pollen production in different carbon dioxide environments. The higher the carbon dioxide concentration, the more pollen was produced. Carbon dioxide is actually has a fertilizing effect on plants because plants breathe in CO2. It's a good thing for plants to do that, but it's a bad thing when that fertilizing effect produces more allergenic pollen. This isn't air related, but it is botanical. Poison ivy also grows larger in greater CO2 environments and produces more urushiol, the substance that causes skin outbreaks and itching. Something else we could see more of. Have you ever been bitten by a mosquito or a tick? Well, climate change is bringing changes in ecology, or more precisely, increasing the areas where ticks and mosquitoes thrive, bite, and spread vector-borne illness. As temperatures warm, rates of malaria, dengue, and Zika from mosquitoes have gone up, as well as Lyme disease and anaplasmosis, which was a new one for me, from ticks. Everyone is affected, but people who spend time outdoors and pregnant women due to the Zika virus are the most vulnerable. Malaria leads to more than 400,000 deaths annually, currently not in Ohio, but in the world. Something to simply be aware of. The CDC estimates that diseases from infected mosquitoes, fleas, and ticks have tripled since 2004. North America is expected to experience the largest climate-driven increase in percentage of people exposed to the mosquito, which transmits Zika and dengue. West Nile is the leading cause of mosquito-borne disease in the continental United States, and Ohio is affected. Thankfully, most people, 8 out of 10 infected with West Nile virus, don't develop symptoms, and for those that do, they'll have flu-like symptoms. However, for about 1 in 150 people, West Nile can lead to encephalitis, meningitis, hospitalization, and even death. Dengue fever. Rates are higher in tropical areas, but are increasing in the United States. Most patients experience flu-like symptoms, but a few develop a severe hemorrhagic form. A vaccine is currently being worked on, especially in the Philippines, where the disease is more prevalent. Lyme disease is caused by the bacterium Borrelia burgdorferi, which is transmitted to people through a black-legged tick bite. Note that these ticks are no bigger than George Washington's ear on a quarter. Usual symptoms include fever, headache, fatigue, and a characteristic target skin rash called erythema migrans. If left untreated, infection can spread to joints, the heart, and the nervous system. Usually responds to a few weeks of antibiotics. Anaplasmosis is another tick-borne illness which is on the increase, especially in the upper Midwest. Caused by the bacterium Anaplasma phagocytophilum, it can make a normally very healthy person feel totally fatigued and febrile. It will resolve with the course of antibiotics, but must be diagnosed and treated to avoid progression. Vibrio is not exactly an Ohio-related bacterial infection, but you may be hearing more about it as its habitat moves north due to climate change. It is mainly found in warm seawater, and I mention it because people from Ohio do occasionally vacation near the ocean. It may enter the body through open wounds or sores and progress to necrotizing fasciitis, or it can be ingested, causing severe GI distress. Closer to home, however, nurses can warn friends, family, and patients, especially those who are immunocompromised, that when it's warmer, disease-causing organisms may grow and spread more rapidly. Beware of the picnic potato salad. Severe weather. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about hurricanes in Ohio, but we can expect more severe rainstorms. Climate change brings warmer air, which holds more water, and due to melting glacial ice, there is increasingly more water available for the warmer air to hold and to let loose in storms. So what does that mean for health? Well, more flooding and decreased air quality due to mold, trauma from injury from the storms, getting hit by a falling tree or something, and housing displacement when homes have been destroyed. Property loss can be particularly damaging to mental health. In Ohio, we need to be concerned with water safety, particularly after heavy storms. Increasing frequency and intensity of rainstorms causes more of our agricultural runoff, which includes nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers. This eventually flows into our rivers and then into Lake Erie. This causes algal bloom, algae and cyanobacteria, which can release potent toxins. Heat intensifies this whole process. There are more algal blooms in warmer weather. Harmful toxins can affect both humans and animals, and depending on the particular toxin, can harm skin, liver, GI, and nervous systems. The CDC reports no human death from algal bloom toxin, but there have been deaths in pets, livestock, and wildlife. Many systems for draining sewage and stormwater in Ohio were designed and built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were engineered for more people, but unfortunately not for climate change or for frequent and intense rainstorms. When these storms occur, sewage and stormwater mix, and therefore sewage is carried into the same outflow as the stormwater, for example, into Lake Erie. E. coli has been found in the drinking water of places where this has happened after heavy rainstorms, and emergency room visits do increase. Many cities are now under consent decree to build separate systems so stormwater and sewage don't mix. But it's expensive and takes a long time. Regardless of sewage treatment design, heavy rainfall is associated with more waterborne illness diseases. Hepatitis A, cryptosporidium, enteric pathogens like E. coli and others. Climate change and nutrition. Well, so many factors affect nutrition and agriculture and food production that it is difficult to determine what to expect. If agriculture is full of unknowns now, there will be even more unknowns in the future related to climate change. The model makers must go crazy trying to factor in every possibility. More heat, earlier growing seasons. Seasonal changes for the pests of the crops. Seasonal changes for the pollinators and effects. Changes for the predators of the pest and predators of the pollinators. Flooding, drought. An earlier season temperature won't help you if your fields are still underwater from spring rains and snow melt. Later on, it may become too hot to work in the fields, or not enough time in the season to complete the cycle. CO2 does have a fertilizing effect on plants, so that could be a good thing, bigger crops, but it might not affect nutritional content. That could vary as well, better as well as worse. Using different cultivars of our current crops. Maybe we can find cultivars that will grow better in the new growth season. So many considerations. There may be good surprises as well as bad. After all, people's diets also always change. In general, food production and fish populations will move towards the poles and away from the equator, but also away from the populations who depend on those food sources. It's been estimated that the Earth can feed 10 billion people. There are now between 7.5 and 7.6 billion, heading towards 8 billion. It's the location of the people and the location and quality of the food supply that will determine nutritional adequacy. We will enjoy adequate nutrition in Ohio, yet how we grow our crops and exactly which crops we will grow will probably change. Yields for various crops go up at increased temperatures to a point. Then it's downhill. Here are two graphs that show this pattern for corn and soybeans. Warmer weather is also favorable for crop pests. There's a moth, for example, that feeds on apples and other fruit and nut crops. Instead of one life cycle per season in warmer weather, it can have two. It's hard to predict patterns for all crop pests, but in general, it would be expected that they would move towards the poles with warmer temperatures. We may get rid of one crop pest in Ohio, only to have to welcome a new one coming up to us from the south. Heat isn't the only variable affecting crops and nutrition. CO2 has its fertilizing effect on plants, yet ground level ozone may have a negative effect on crop growth. Yields are projected to actually increase, but in different places, towards the poles and away from the equator. These graphs show the percentage change in yields of corn, wheat, and soybeans, assuming the current atmospheric CO2 projections. Green means the same, or light green is a loss of yield, and bluish purple means a gain. Crop yields may be most effective of all by drought and flooding. These maps show projected changes in yields due to these effects. In general, greater yields towards the poles and less in dry areas and closer to the equator. Availability of water may indeed be the determining factor as to whether agricultural crops can grow at all. On this map, you see currently the number of months that current usage exceeds supply. The red and brown areas consistently drain aquifers and use more water than they receive, a situation that is not sustainable. Most of Ohio, we will use the same amount. We never have to drain from our water supply. Another water-related risk due to climate change is saltwater intrusion. Pressure from rising sea levels can push saltwater into the groundwater, which is not good for either agriculture or drinking. Climate change already has and will continue to cause human migration. Think of people losing homes due to drought, flooding, wildfires, and heavy storms. The United Nations estimates about 20 million people worldwide have been forced to migrate due to weather conditions each year since 2008. This is actually a good news, bad news situation. Bad because all of these people lose their homes, but good because it's likely many lives have been saved due to early warning systems and preparation for when bad weather and bad conditions hit. For example, 215,000 Puerto Ricans were able to flee to the United States, the continental United States, following Hurricane Maria. It's estimated that twice as many people are displaced due to weather as due to conflict and violence. In addition to the expected health effects of migration, overcrowding, communicable disease, limited access to medications and health care, mental disorders from migration may last for years, even for generations. At this time, international humanitarian law does not provide protection for people who migrate due to climate change or due to changing climate conditions. Children, the elderly, pregnant women, people with pre-existing mental health conditions, those in poverty, homeless, and first responders are most vulnerable for mental health disorders related to climate change. Health professionals will likely feel the impacts by having to provide crisis response, caring for a changing patient population who may have more complex needs, language issues, insurance issues, trauma, and people with limited resources and greater need. Not only do health professionals need to know about the health impacts of climate change in general, but they need to be aware of how the healthcare sector is contributing to and impacted by greenhouse gas emissions. One way you cut the data, the healthcare industry contributes almost 10% of US greenhouse gas emissions. The typical areas of largest impact are highlighted in the gray clouds in this slide. And this is from Healthcare Without Harm. Hospitals are the second most energy intensive facilities in the country, and they have to be. They use 2.5 times more energy per square foot than other commercial buildings. Hospitals are ranked as the third most water intense public buildings after senior care facilities and hotels, using an average of 570 gallons per staffed bed per day. Hospitals serve a lot of food to their staffs, patients, and visitors. Since an estimated 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the livestock sector, hospitals can make a big difference by serving less meat. US hospitals generate 29 pounds of waste per patient per day in the hospital, but the manufacturing process and transportation of these products also adds to the carbon footprint. How to take action. There are many, many ways health professionals can reduce their impact on climate at work and at home. These are just a few examples listed in the green clouds. PracticeGreenHealth.org is a great resource for ideas on how hospitals and healthcare organizations can reduce their climate impact. Several hospital systems in the United States have committed through that organization to 100% renewable energy. The less fossil fuel energy we use, the better. Ultimately, it comes down to using less energy, electricity, heat, cooling, and gasoline, and fewer material goods. There's nothing wrong with individual efforts such as driving less or recycling, or reusing materials, eating less meat. You can find lists of ideas, any of the resources listed at the end of this program. But real change needs to come from widespread involvement. That means politics. We've got to get the greenhouse gases out of the air and not put more back in. In addition to working with hospitals and employers, nurses can become involved at the local level by providing input into a city's climate action plan. These include ways of mitigating and adapting to climate change, everything from how to keep people safe during a heat wave to building more green spaces, to changing the sources of our energy to become more carbon neutral. And at the national levels, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other members of Congress have proposed the Green New Deal. And just to mention, this is not the only Green New Deal. There have been others proposed as well. Various climate plans from different political candidates. This Green New Deal, however, was written in the same spirit as the New Deal that helped get the United States out of the Depression in the 1930s. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of money. But together as a country, we can do it. We can limit the effects of climate change and live healthier lives as a result. This slide is a much oversimplified version of the Green New Deal, and it's never going to pass in the way that it is formally worded right now, and it's meant to stimulate discussion and debate and changes. But oversimplified, the goals are, and with the government being responsible, to achieve net zero gas emissions, create good jobs in the process, invest in our infrastructure, and taking a look at D, isn't this what all nurses want for all people? Clean air, clean water, climate and community resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment to promote justice and equity. The slide shows what it's all about. Certainly the bicyclists, except for the lazy bum who decided to take a break and snap a picture, which was me. But notice all of the windmills. This picture was taken in Iowa, near Newton, Iowa, where Maytag washer dryers were once made. The company left for overseas and understandably devastated the town's economy. Somehow they got a grant to start manufacturing and distributing windmills, which resulted in good jobs and a great increase in a renewable form of energy in Iowa and decreased carbon emissions. So it was a win-win. It took a lot of concerted effort, but as a nation, yeah, we can do something similar. This is from the same Eco America survey that I mentioned at the very start of this activity. A strong majority, even across party lines, favors some form of a new Green New Deal. Overall, 81% of all voters are for and 18% are against. There is strong support again, even across political party lines, for solutions such as charging corporate polluters a fee, cash for carbon, you may hear it mentioned that way, modernizing the electric grid, laws for energy efficient building and cars, expanding public transit, and individual and corporate tax credits for clean energy. Lots of support. It seems to be in the 70s and 80% support across party lines. The last time I presented this activity to a live group, at the end, one participant raised her hand and asked, "What do you want us to take from this information? What do you want us to do right now?" The answer is probably different for each nurse, but it can be found somewhere in the following. We care about our health. We care about the health of our families, friends, and patients. We care about the future. Consider climate change when assessing your patients. When appropriate, relate how climate change affects their health. Support efforts to decrease energy and emissions at home and at work. Support efforts to reduce climate change. Learn more. We can help for ourselves, our families, our patients, and our future. If you feel compelled to take further action, check out the websites of these two organizations at the top, Healthcare Without Harm and Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, or ANNE. Here are some additional good resources, and they all have websites. And here is a bibliography. Yeah, but it's not stopping.